Today's video has been sponsored by Voxel Dance Tango. When I started building the PZY model BMW F80 M3 on the channel, a customer of mine reached out about a special project that I might be able to do for him. He found a designer on Decals 3D called Pixelsun, who created a couple of accessories for this specific kit. One of those accessories was a sports package with a front splitter and two rear spoilers, and there was also another different version with a super wide body kit for this kit. Pixelsun is not sponsoring this video in any way. He doesn't even know that I'm making this video. These files were bought by my customer and sent over to me for me to print for him so they can use them on his build. He does have some other super cool files on his page, so do feel free to check him out and save him for later if you're interested in printing one of these. After downloading the files, I quickly uploaded them into the Voxel Dance Tango slicer. Now you can check out a lot of different angles on these parts, go all around them to see if they need any fixing or improving, or simply just rotate them into the correct orientation you want them to be printed in. When doing the orientation, it does give a slight ghosted image of the actual part in the way that it is going to be mounted or positioned before actually doing so, and then you press apply and it goes to the said angle, or you can just cancel it and leave it as is. In this case, the file loaded into the slicer perfectly in the same orientation that I wanted it to be for the slicing and supporting, so I could quickly just move on to generate some automated supports, support the part, and get it ready to be printed. Speaking of automated supports, that is also the main function that I love about this slicer. Now, most slicers do have an automated support function, and generally it is a miss. Now, usually it's a bit of a hit and miss, but most of the time in other slicers that I'm using, it is a big miss. It adds supports in areas that don't need to be supported at all, just randomly adds a lot of weird artifacts all over the place that aren't supposed to be there, and just adds a lot of cleanup time. With the automated support function in this slicer, it's more of a hit than a miss. Now, believe me, it's not perfect, but most of the supports are added in places that it actually needs it and not go into random places that it doesn't. Now, it is also, of course, always the best way to check all of the supports before you move on to slicing and printing to get rid of any mistakes. But in this case, I'm just adding a couple of supports because I like to add a little bit more than you're probably going to need, but I'm better safe than sorry and don't want to have a failed print and reprint it. Besides the fantastic automated support system in this slicer, there are of course some other functions that I would like to talk about as well. Now, not all files that you find online are perfect, and therefore it is very important to have the function of a one-click repair. One-click repair for damaged models, including bad edges, holes, wrong orientation of patches, and crossing faces, to ensure the model can be printed successfully. The other function is shelling and adding a lattice structure. One-click automatic shelling and adding lattice structure, reducing the material printing time, reducing the deformation of parts, and increasing the strength of parts. Now, the main part you get a slicer for is, of course, slicing. And due to the optimized algorithm of the slicer, the slicing speed is super fast, which reduces printing pixel lines and increases image anti-aliasing, image grayscale and blurring, improving the surface quality of the model and therefore getting the best possible print. When you want to add as many parts as possible onto the build plate to save on printing time and the most efficient printing ways, there of course is the nested arrangement. This is a one-click system that automatically arranges all of the parts onto the build plate to get them oriented as best as possible and to fit the most amount of parts onto your build plate for the most optimal printing. In some cases, when prototyping parts, it is not always necessary to print the full part and have it as a finished piece, but you could also add some honeycomb structure to it, taking out a lot of pieces in the part that aren't supposed to be there or are not necessary to be there, just simply for a prototype part to see if some fit and finish is correct, and therefore it saves on a lot of material, and it can also strengthen the part as well. And the final part that I like as well is the label function. Now, when printing a lot of parts or a lot of similar parts, it doesn't hurt to have the parts labeled. So if you have a front wheel and a rear wheel, front tire, rear tire, or maybe even some parts that need to specifically go on the left and some that need to go on the right, you can simply just quickly add a label to the part and then make absolutely sure that you don't make any mistakes when putting the part onto your model, that you have the one that is correct for that side. The specific printer that I will be using is the Nova 3D Whale SE3. Now this printer is not yet listed in the Voxel Dance slicer, so therefore I'm simply just using the slicer with the functions that I love, that I spoke about earlier, exporting the STL, importing it to my regular slicer for exporting, and getting it ready for the printer itself. After preparing and slicing all of the parts, they were exported into the printer, and then the printer was set to work. A couple hours later, and all of the body kit parts have been printed. Now they are of course still pretty dirty coming out of the resin vat, and that needs to be cleaned up. So first of all, I'm just going to be checking over the parts to see if they have printed correctly. Then I can remove the build plate and start checking over them a bit better at a different orientation before giving them a quick rinse and then a final clean. The first problem that I ran into is kind of one of luxury. The build plates are getting bigger, so you can print bigger parts or more parts on one print, but that also means that it doesn't fit into my cleaning system. So I had to take them off of the build plate first and then just give them a quick rinse for the initial cleanup in some dirty alcohol, and then put them into a basket altogether for the final clean and rinse in some clean alcohol. After about 5 minutes of cleanup, I take them out of the alcohol to let them air dry, but if you're in a hurry, you can also just use a hair dryer or just a fan to speed up the process, evaporating all of the alcohol, or otherwise just leave them out to air dry. A little while later, all of the parts are now fully dry and ready for the supports to be removed. Now, the nice thing about the supports that I added in the Tango slicer is that they are nice and light and super easy to remove. This makes it a lot easier for me and a lot less likely to damage any parts. You could also just heat the parts up slightly, but I found that pretty quickly without any heat or anything else, the parts just simply snap off of the supports. It does leave a little bit of a small bulge or a small hole, but that is the same with any other supports, as you're simply just breaking some parts off. Nonetheless, they do break off incredibly easy, and all of the structures that are left are really easily sanded off later on in the refining stage. With the supports removed, a quick cure in the UV curing chamber. I'm doing 5 minutes on each side, just turning them over after 5 minutes. They are fully cured and ready for final preparation. So like I said, when removing supports, there are a couple of small pins, sometimes holes, sometimes just excessive material that still need to be either filled or removed. Luckily, with these parts being resin, it is really easy to just remove it with a little bit of sanding, using some sanding sticks, maybe even some sandpaper or sanding sponges, and you're pretty much ready to go. When placing supports, I always try to hide them in areas that are not visible, or at least where they are the easiest to remove on some flat spots with a bit of sandpaper, or in this case a sanding stick. With a little bit of time spent cleaning up and preparing the parts, they are now pretty much ready to go, so let's give them a quick test fit. Overall, I'm super happy with how easy this project turned out to be. Thanks to the Voxel Dance Tango slicer, it was a lot faster and more convenient to add the supports and get the parts ready to be printed. And on the Nova 3D, printed at 0.02, the parts came out super clean. They fit perfectly just in one go. Not really that much sanding or adjusting needed to be done, apart from removing all of the supports and the small artifacts that were left over, but that is just the standard stuff. The parts fit in place, they looked super nice and smooth, and none of the parts failed during printing, so that is also a really good thing. Now, of course, we have the super nice Widebody kit for the body, but also the other, just a little bit more regular sport package with a small lip spoiler on the rear, rear window, and of course the small chin spoiler for underneath the front bumper. If you're interested in checking out Voxel Dance Tango, there will be a link in the description down below, same as Nova 3D for their Whale SE3 and all of the resins that they offer, and of course Pixelsun for all of the 3D files. If you found this project video interesting, please leave a comment down below and other stuff you'd like to see, and thank you guys for watching.